Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. In honor of Halloween and my love of Scream, I thought I would do a Scream deep dive. So behind me, we are going to have the main cast of characters. A lot of these characters sort of stay in the franchise, and we're only going to be going over the first three. There will be a part 2 and a part 3 following. Part 2 is going to be the 4th movie, part 3 is going to be the last 3 movies once the 7th movie in the franchise comes out. But I thought this would be fun, and if you guys like it, let me know down below. Also, before we begin, my pointer stick is a cat toy. So if you're not familiar with the franchise, the first 3 movies start by following Sidney Prescott. She is our main character, and the majority of the trilogy is her being hunted by someone in a ghost-faced costume. Each movie has a different set of killers, has its own rules. Our main cast of characters in this first movie is obviously Sidney Prescott. We have Billy Loomis, who is Sidney's boyfriend. We have Stu Macher, who is Billy's best friend, and he's also dating Tatum, who is Sidney's best friend as well. We have Gale Weathers, who is a journalist. We have Sidney's dad. He plays a pretty minor role, but he comes up in the majority of the movies. And then we also have Dewey, who is Tatum's brother, but he also works on the police department, and you'll see he eventually has a thing with Gale and becomes good friends with Sidney. And then lastly, we have Randy. Randy is again part of the franchise overall, and he serves to kind of bring the meta-ness to the Scream franchise. The Scream franchise is a slasher horror franchise, but it is incredibly meta, and it makes a lot of jokes and references to other horror movies and the horror genre in general. So before we get in, I thought to kind of exemplify the meta-ness of the Scream franchise, we could talk about all of the movies that are mentioned in this first Scream movie. So we have Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Carrie, Psycho, When Strangers Call, Friday the 13th, Exorcist, The Howling, Prom Night, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Spit on Your Grave, The Town That Dread Sundown, The Bad Seed, Silence of the Lambs, Candyman, The Fog, and Terror Train. That was just the references that I caught. I'm sure there are plenty more, and as the franchise goes on, there are a plethora of movie references. But in this first one alone, you can sort of get the idea that this is making a commentary or referencing other horror movies. In our opening scene, we have a girl alone in her house when she gets a call from a wrong number. After hanging up on him twice, they banter back and forth, and we get the first instance of the famous line, "What's your favorite scary movie?" She says Halloween. They go back and forth about what scary movies are like and kind of the typical tropes. And after the guy on the phone asks her what her name is, because he wants to get to know who he's looking at, the scene ramps up to the eventual murder of the girl. And arguably the best, most iconic, and my favorite horror slasher killer scene in any really horror movie that I have ever seen. We see her parents pull up to the house while Ghostface is murdering her, and he hangs her from a tree, and her parents find her. We then cut to an opening scene of Sidney Prescott alone in her bedroom when Billy Loomis, her boyfriend, comes in through the window. He scares her and she ends up screaming, and her dad comes to investigate. We then get knowledge that he is away on business a lot and that he's going to be away for like a week, leaving Sidney alone. And when her dad leaves, they resume having a playful banter in which Billy equates her to the girl in The Exorcist. So we love that. They then have an argument about their sexual history and the future of their sexual relationship. They make out a little bit, and then Billy goes back out the window. Next day, we see Sidney walking up to the campus of the Woodsboro High School, which is kind of infested with journalists and also police officers. And we find out that Casey had been murdered the night before, and they don't know what happens. Tatum and Sidney are talking, and Tatum mentions that it is the worst crime that Woodsboro has seen in a long time, alluding to the fact that Sidney might have some close personal feelings about the murder that had happened previously. Sydney then gets called to the principal's office, where we are first introduced to Dewey, and they start asking her questions about Casey's death, but we don't actually know what the questions were until we cut to a scene of Sydney, Billy, Stu, Tatum, and Randy all sitting on a fountain area outside of the school, and they're discussing the murders, what they asked. We find out the police asked, did you know Casey? Do you hunt? Questions like that. We find out that the do you hunt questions were asked to Stu and Billy and Randy, but not to Sydney and Tatum. And Stu and Randy begin questioning the gender of the killer. And Stu asserts that a female would not be able to butcher and mutilate Casey like she was. Stu actually dated Casey, but he was with Tatum the night before when Casey was murdered. And then when Stu and Randy start to talk about the gruesomeness behind the murder and like the logistics of dismembering a body, Sydney storms off. After school, we see Sydney on the phone with Tatum, and they're discussing Sydney staying with Tatum for the night, but she is at work or something, or at practice, so Sydney is going to stay at her house until she calls her later in the night. Sydney falls asleep on the couch, and when she wakes up it's dark, and she turns on the news to find them talking about the death of a woman who had been raped and murdered in her home, and we find out that it is her mother, Doreen. She then gets a call from Tatum saying that she is running late at practice and that she should be maybe an hour more. Following the call with Tatum, Sydney gets a call from Ghostface, and he's asking her a bunch of questions, joking around with her. He asks her if she likes scary movies, and she says no. And she tries to ascertain who it is, but she guesses that it's Randy, and when the killer says that it's not Randy and that he's on her front porch, she walks out and discovers that no one is there. She kind of antagonizes Ghostface until she walks back into her house and locks the door behind her, and Ghostface pops out of the closet. He wrestles her to the ground and tries to stab her, and then they race through the house, and she locks him out of her bedroom. She tries to call 911, but the phone line has been disconnected, so she tries to do hard of hearing accessibility feature on her computer, but before she can, the knocking on her bedroom door stops, and Billy pops in through the window, claiming that he heard her screaming and tried to come in through the front door, but it was locked. She gets suspicious of Billy after they hug, and a cell phone falls out of Billy's pocket, so she races down to get out of the house thinking that it's Billy, and she runs into Dewey, who's holding a Ghostface mask. After she explains the events of what happened, Billy is arrested, and Gail Weathers shows up trying to question Sydney. Tatum has shown up, and she is trying to console Sydney, and Sydney ends up driving off with Dewey to go back to the police station. Back at the police station, she's being questioned, and the sheriff is questioning Billy and his dad at the same time, and they decide to hold him until they get his phone records back, showing if he had called Sydney and also if he had been the one that called Casey. We do have a delightful scene where Gail gets called a bitch goddess by her cameraman. That's not important, it's just funny. And then the evidence on the mask comes back on the costume, and it's revealed that it's commonly sold. Gail goes around the back of the police station and tries to question Sydney after she is released from questioning, and Sydney punches her after it's revealed that Gail wrote a book about Sydney's mother's death. Back at Tatum's house, Sydney gets a call from Ghostface with a voice changer claiming she accused the wrong guy and she would find out who he is soon enough. The next morning, Billy is released, and when Sydney gets to school, she confronts Gail Weathers, who is parked outside the school, and we find out that the man Sydney identified as her mother's murderer, Cotton Weary, might not be guilty of anything but having an affair with her mother. He might have been framed, and the current murderers might be the person that murdered her mother. Gail decides that she wants to find proof that Cotton Weary didn't actually do it. Sydney back in the school, where she runs into Billy and her argue about Billy being a suspect, and she's still very upset about her mother's death. They get into an argument about their sexual relationship, and Billy makes the delightful comment, "Why would I be mad? Is it because I have a girlfriend who would rather accuse me of being a psychopathic killer than touch me?" And told Sydney to get over her mother's death. Great boyfriend, Billy is. We then see Sydney storm off away from this conversation with Billy into the bathroom, where she overhears two girls debating Sydney possibly being the killer. And once they leave, Sydney leaves the stall, goes to the sink to wash her hands, and she hears some rattling noise. She gets down on the floor and sees someone in boots that Ghostface wears stepping down off the toilet wearing the Ghostface costume, and the Ghostface tries to attack her, and she leaves the bathroom. We then see the meeting of the delightful Gail and Dewey for the first time. They do a little bit of flirting, and it's revealed that Sydney's father hasn't been ruled out as a suspect, and they still haven't been able to find him. Remember, in the beginning he said he was going on a business trip. After the school gets shut down and everyone leaves, the principal ends up getting stabbed. Earlier in the movie, we had seen a scene of him berating a couple of kids in Ghostface costumes for wearing the costume and terrorizing people in the hallway, and when he is alone at the school, he ends up getting stabbed. Before the party, but after school, we see Stu, Billy, and Randy at the movie store, and Randy and Stu are talking about the murders and who it could possibly be, and Randy sort of asserts that it's probably Billy because Sydney wouldn't have sex with him, and Stu says that it's probably Randy because he's in love with Sydney and she doesn't like him back. We then have a scene where Billy overhears Randy talking shit about him and basically calling him the killer, and him and Stu kind of sandwich him between the two of them, and Billy says some really threatening and domineering things to him and then storms off. It's revealed to Dewey by the sheriff that the phone calls made to Casey and Sydney were listed as belonging to Neil, Sydney's father. And previously in that blockbuster scene, we had Randy say that everybody's a suspect, but the father is a red herring. We then have a delightful scene of Dewey eating ice cream. Cut to the scene of Stu throwing the party at his house, and Sydney again attends with Tatum. Gail Weathers ends up convincing Dewey to let her into the party with him because he is keeping an eye on Sydney, and she plants a camcorder in the party. We then see Tatum go into the garage after Stu asked her to go get more beer. She cuts the light on the garage and accidentally opens the garage door, and she closes the garage door, goes to the fridge, gets more beer, and then the light cuts out. We see her try to open the garage door and it doesn't work, so she tries to go out the garage, the lifty thing again, but it stops halfway. She turns back around to the main door leading into the house, and someone in a Ghostface costume is standing there. She thinks that it's probably Stu trying to play a joke, and then he tries to stab her. They have a tussle in the garage. She knocks him out with a fridge, throws some bottles at him, and then she tries to escape through the cat door that is in the garage door, but Ghostface opens it, essentially chopping her in half. And she's hanging out the side of the garage door, out the cat door. We then cut to Sydney, who is looking for Tatum, and Billy shows up even though Sydney had been told that Billy wasn't going to be in the party, and he asks her to talk to him alone. They go up to one of the bedrooms, and we see Gail and the cameraman watching the camcorder, and in the camcorder footage we can see the party, the living room of the party. We cut back to Sydney and Billy in the bedroom talking about the murders and stuff and why she's still freaked out, and she says, but this is life, this isn't a movie, and Billy says, sure it is, Sid, it's all a movie, it's all one big movie. Randy and a bunch of the teenagers at the party in the living room, and Randy breaks down the kind of rules of a horror movie. Randy is a horror movie enthusiast, and he constantly is talking about the rules. He's sort of like the person that shows up and kind of gives some context to other horror movies and maintains that meta-ness. Randy breaks down the three horror movie rules. The first one being never have sex, sex equals death, never drink or do drugs, and never say you'll be right back. The group laughs at him. Stu makes a comment that he'll be right back, and Randy tells him, I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife. Gail outside talking to her cameraman while they're watching the camcorder. Dewey knocks on the van where her and the cameraman are, and Gail and Dewey decide to go on a walk. They end up having some flirting, and they eventually kiss. Sydney and Billy having sex, and we see Randy downstairs in that living room with all those kids. Randy gets a call saying that the principal of their school has been stabbed. He tells all of the other kids and they rush out, leaving Randy alone watching a movie on the couch. We see Gail and Dewey kissing, and they find Neil Prescott's car parked in the woods behind Stewie's house. And we cut back to Sydney and Billy after sex. Sydney asks who he called with his one phone call in jail. Billy says his dad, and Sydney says the sheriff called him. Billy said, yeah, when he tried to call, no one answered. Sydney says, huh? And Billy says, you don't still think it was me, right? Sydney laughs it off and says it would be smart to use his one phone call from prison to her to make her think that he's not Ghostface. And as Billy is getting in her face, kind of trying to intimidate her, but also kind of like make it sweet, I guess, Ghostface walks up behind Billy and stabs Billy. Sydney and Ghostface run through the house. She eventually locks herself in the attic and climbs out a window, where she climbs down the side of the house and sees Tatum dead in the garage door. Sydney makes it to the camera van, where the camcorder from the living room is still going, but there's like a delay. She watches Ghostface creep up behind Randy as Randy is yelling, behind you, and then we see Ghostface creep back out the room, and he goes and slits the cameraman's throat. Sydney crawls out the back of the van. Dewey goes into the house. Gail finds her cameraman's blood on the van and tries to call 911, and then she tries to drive off and discovers a dead body on her windshield. She kind of like does a 3-point turn and like stops and starts to try to like get the body off of her van, and she crashes when Sydney runs out in the middle of the road. Sydney runs back to the house and goes inside looking for Dewey. They run into each other, but as he's walking towards her, he falls down with a knife in his back. Sydney and Ghostface tussle around the police cruiser until she manages to get out of the police cruiser and run back into the house. Ghostface disappears, and Randy and Stu show up and claiming that each other is the one that stabbed Tatum. She ends up locking them outside of the house, and when she turns around, Billy is stumbling down the stairs. Randy is knocking out the door repeatedly, asking to come in. Billy ends up letting Randy in, and he shoots Randy, turns around and says, surprise, Sydney, and starts licking the blood off of his hand, and it's revealed that it is corn syrup, and he says, we all go a little mad sometimes. Sydney turns around to run and runs into the arms of Stu, and he's holding a voice changer to his mouth saying, surprise, Sydney. It's revealed that they framed Cotton Weary. They watched a few movies, took a few notes, and they did it because Sydney's mother was a slut, flashing it all over town, and was having sex with Billy's father, causing Billy's mother to leave. Stu is kind of just like giggling in the background and saying like, it's a scream, baby. They move into the kitchen after she tries to escape them, and it is Sydney, Billy, and Stu in the kitchen, and Billy pulls Neil, Sydney's father, out of the closet and reveals that the plan is to frame him for everybody's death. They'll get away to make a sequel, and they start stabbing each other, and they start arguing back and forth because Billy overstabs Stewie, but he doesn't want to get stabbed, so they start arguing, and it's quickly revealed that Billy was really the leader and Stu was kind of just along for the ride. And while they're stabbing each other, Sydney makes the comment that they're crazy, they've watched too many movies, and Billy says, don't blame the movies. Movies don't make psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. When they're done stabbing each other, Stu tries to go for a gun that they have in the house, and he finds it gone. That's when they turn around to see Gail holding up the gun at Billy and Stu. She tries to shoot, but they find out that the safety is on. Billy attacks her and knocks her out on the front porch. When they turn back around, Sydney is gone, and the phone rings to a call from Sydney using a voice changer saying the police are on the way. Billy tries to find Sydney, and when she pops out from a closet wearing a Ghostface costume, she stabs Billy in the stomach with an umbrella. Stu and Sydney wrestle until she knocks him out with a vase, and she drops a TV on him, and then Randy and Sydney are reunited. Billy gets back up and attacks, and Gail shoots him again. After they're all standing over Billy's body, Randy says, "Be careful, this is the moment where the supposedly dead killer comes back to life." Billy pops up, Sydney shoots him and says, "Not in my movie," and the movie ends with Gail narrating the events of a night to her cameraman as the camera pans over the house over to the sunset. That was a recap of the first Scream movie. I will say I think they did a pretty good job of setting up Stu and Billy as the murderers. This is my favorite movie in the franchise. I think it makes the most sense. It's the most like cinematic, and it just feels really organic, and I love Billy and Stu's dynamic. I think Stu is really fun, and Billy is like definitely more in it for revenge. Stu is just kind of wild. And I really like the first one. I've seen it multiple times. Let's move on to the second movie, which came out in 1997, and it follows our main cast of characters: Sydney, Gail, Randy, Dewey, Neil, Cotton Weary, who is now an official part of the franchise. He is the person that Sydney accused of killing her mother. Hallie, who is Sydney's best friend. Mickey, who is part of the friend group. Debbie Salt, who is a reporter that is obsessed with Gail. Derek, who is Sydney's new boyfriend. And then of course we have Ghostface. We open the movie with a couple seeing Stab, which is sort of like canonically a movie franchise based off of Gail Weathers' book about the Woodsboro murders. It includes the killer of Ghostface. They get into the movie theater and it is packed with people in Ghostface costumes, just kind of like, you know, laughing and having a good time, and they're playing the first movie. She decides she wants to go get popcorn, and as she's going back into the movie theater, the boyfriend is wearing a Ghostface costume. He jumps out and scares her. They laugh, and then the boyfriend says that he's going to go to the bathroom. He goes to the bathroom, and while he's in the bathroom stall, he thinks he hears someone maybe having sex in the stall next door, so he sticks his ear to the wall, and Ghostface stabs him with a knife through the wall, leaving his dead body in the stall. Ghostface then goes back into the movie theater and sits down with the girlfriend. She thinks it's her boyfriend, so she makes some jokes back and forth, but she quickly realizes that this isn't her boyfriend. He's not really acting the same, and she gets freaked out. When she tries to get up to leave, Ghostface stabs her, and she tries to run out of the movie theater, but it's kind of a madhouse. They're getting to the point in the movie where Casey is being killed, so everybody's up throwing popcorn, joking around, horsing around, stuff like that, and Ghostface is just continually stabbing the girlfriend, but everybody in the audience thinks that it's a joke, and they kind of are egging Ghostface on, and she ends up getting on top in front of the stage, and everybody realizes that it's not actually an act, and she falls down to the floor dead. We cut to Sydney in college getting a call from someone using the Ghostface voice changer, making some comments, and we kind of get the idea that she gets a lot of prank calls after what happened in Woodsboro and after Gail's book. We then see her roommate and best friend Hallie come into the room, and she cuts on a TV interview with Cotton Weary, who is doing an interview about being exonerated. And to kind of distract her from the conversation, Hallie invites her to a party at a sorority house that she's trying to rush for. And then they see on the news that two people, the death of the two people, and Sydney decides that she needs to find Randy. Randy in like a film class, and he's having a debate with a bunch of his classmates, including Buffy, whose name is Cece, but I'll call her Buffy. And they're debating the legitimacy of sequels, like are they good, are they bad? And we get a lot of mentions of other sequels in other franchises. Sydney pulls Randy aside, and they go to like the college's like main square or something like that, where the police are giving a speech to the people at the college that they don't think that the murderers are connected to any like previous murders. There's questions from journalists about it possibly being connected to the Woodsboro murders because the person was wearing a ghost face mask, and they claim they don't think that it's connected. Dewey shows up to tell Sydney that she needs to be safe, that he does think it's connected to the ghost face murders, and that if someone is out for her trying to recreate the murders, then they're probably already in her friend group and she kind of needs to keep an eye out. Gale brings Cotton Weary to confront Sydney on camera. He basically just says that he wants to move on. Sydney slaps Gale, and Cotton reveals that he thought that Sydney knew about the interview, and as Gale is storming off, he says that he did his part. Dewey confronts Gale about Sydney, and they allude to like some possible issues within their relationship, but we don't really get a whole ton of information. We then cut to the scene of Sydney and Hallie going to the sorority party, and then we see Buffy at her sorority house alone when she gets a call from an unknown man. They banter back and forth. She hangs up. She hears some noise in the house. One of her sorority sisters pops up and jump scares her and then ends up leaving. And the killer gets her, stabs her after a tussle, and throws her off a balcony. The sorority party that Sydney and Hallie are at ends up getting shut down because of the murder. And Sydney and Derek are leaving. Derek's her boyfriend, are leaving the party. Derek is on the front porch waiting for her, and Sydney answers the phone that's ringing at the sorority house, and it is someone using a voice changer to sound like Ghostface, and he tells her that it is showtime on the phone. She hangs up, and when she turns around, the door is closed and Ghostface charges her. She races through the house until she gets to the backyard where Derek is. Derek rushes back into the house. Sydney stays outside. Dewey shows up. She tells Dewey that Derek had rushed in alone, and Dewey finds Derek with his arm slashed in the hallway. At the hospital, Mikey, who's part of their friend group, gets interrogated by the police, and Mikey, after getting interrogated by the police, sits down with Sydney and makes a comment about Derek being kind of crazy for going back into the house, and Sydney becomes suspicious. And then in the interview with Derek and the police, Dewey implies that it's also kind of weird that Derek would go in with an armed murderer in the house by himself. And then later, Gale and Dewey are at the police station when they make the connection that all the victims' names match victims from the Woodsboro Ghostface murders, and they assume that it's a copycat. Sydney tells Derek that she wants them to break up and for him to kind of like go away, like, you know, stay away from her. He asks her if she doesn't trust him. She kind of eludes the question and just says, "I don't want to see you get hurt." Debbie saw it following Gale around. Debbie says it makes sense that if it's a copycat killer, that copycat killer would also be from Woodsboro. We then cut to the scene of Hallie and Derek eating together at the school cafeteria, and Mickey walks up with a camcorder in his hand asking if they think that Sydney would approve of an interview with Mickey. Sydney walks up and it's like very tense between all of them, so Derek gets up and starts singing a song to her. She seems kind of like she likes it. She finds it funny. He's like dancing on the tables and stuff. And she finds it funny, but she's kind of embarrassed. And then Derek gives her his Greek letters, which I guess means something, and they kiss. So we then have Randy and Dewey having lunch together, and Randy breaks down the rules of a horror movie sequel. The body count is always bigger, the death scenes are always much more elaborate, and if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never ever, and then he's cut off. He then starts to list his suspects to Dewey. He says the boyfriend, Derek, but it's kind of a tired, played out trope. Mickey, the film student who could be trying to recreate a horror movie. Randy, and if Randy's a suspect, then Dewey is also a suspect, so let's just ignore that. And it could also be Gale, because she's sort of an opportunist, so she could be doing this so that then she could write a book about it. But if she's not the killer, then she's also a prey. She's also prey. We cut to Sydney in the school's theater having a conversation with her theater director. While they're rehearsing and people are dancing around her, she sees someone in a ghost face mask. Nobody else sees the person in the ghost face mask, but she rushes backstage and finds Derek there. She gets suspicious because Derek wasn't supposed to pick her up. Mickey was, but Derek said he's there to pick her up. and she basically breaks up with him again and tells him to stay away. We then have Gail, Randy, Dewey, and Gail's cameraman, who is new, discussing the killer's patterns in the like central town, I'm gonna call it a town square, the college square. And Gail gets a call from someone using a voice changer saying that they're on the school campus and that she should try to find him. She gives the phone to Randy while her and Dewey try to search everybody's that's on a phone to find out who it is. And Randy is kind of like walking through the campus trying to find, you know, who it could be. And he basically starts insulting Billy, and the killer gets mad and drags him into Gail's camera van, where we see him through a side mirror getting stabbed repeatedly, and his blood drips out of the door. We see Sydney at a computer at the library, and she gets an instant message basically saying she's gonna die. She does have bodyguards with her, and as she's hiding while the bodyguards are trying to find the person that sent her the instant message, Cotton Weary pulls her down the stairs. And he tries to convince her to go on a Diane Sawyer interview with him for money. When she says no, he gets mad and kind of like backs her into a corner, and he chases her through the library and gets arrested. He gets released after some questioning, and then when Gail confronts him, he says, "You've been so instrumental in me gaining my freedom. You're not having character doubts, are you?" and walks off. And then as he's walking out, he tries to hand Sydney his car. Dewey tells Sydney at the police station that they're going to take her somewhere safe, and Hallie says, "I'll be there with you." Debbie Salt asks Gail a bunch of intrusive questions outside the police station, and Gail basically tells her to fuck off. And then her cameraman, Joel, quits, and she admits to Dewey that she feels bad. They decide to work together, and then Gail realizes that they probably caught Ghostface on tape with the tapes that her cameraman gave her. They find a VCR in the college and start watching tapes together. They have a cute moment where they like bump heads and bump hands, and then they eventually start making out until one of the TVs in the area cuts on, and it's filming them, or it's clips of them from the killer's point of view, including right then and there. And Dewey leaves, and Dewey races up to the projector room, and nobody's there. Ghostface goes after Gail and chases her through the classrooms, and then when Dewey tries to follow her, he gets stabbed on the other side of like a two-paned window where Gail can see it. And then we get this delightful scene of Ghostface trying to find her. We see Derek waiting outside of Sydney's dorm to say goodbye, and as she's leaving, he touches her face and says, "When this is all over, I'll still be here." She kisses him and leaves. And as they're driving Sydney someplace safe, they stop at a stoplight, and Ghostface breaks the windows out, kills her bodyguards, and steals the car. He runs the car into a piece of construction equipment, killing the cop on the hood by chopping him in half. Ghostface is passed out in the driver's seat, so Sydney and Hallie try to break out by pulling because the back doors are locked because it's a police car, by pulling the grate between the front and the back seat apart, and then they have to crawl over Ghostface's body. They make it out, and Sydney wants to go back and pull Ghostface's mask off to see who it is, but Hallie tries to like convince her otherwise. After they argue for a little bit, Sydney goes back to the car to look at Ghostface's mask, like Ghostface's face, and he's gone. We then see Sydney turn back around, and Hallie is getting stabbed by Ghostface, who is behind her. We then see Gail run into Cotton Weary in the hallways of the school, and he's covered in blood. He claims that he found Dewey and was trying to find help. She runs from Cotton and goes outside and finds Debbie Salt there and tries to use Debbie Salt to call 911. Sydney runs back into the school's theater after seeing Hallie get stabbed, and she makes it onto the stage where the spotlight comes on. She hears a noise behind her, and Derek is taped to a star with a mask over his face. Ghostface pops out of the audience and shuts his voice changer off to reveal that it was Mickey. Mickey shoots Derek in the chest, and Derek dies. Mickey reveals he wants to get caught and blame the movies, and Sydney smacks him with her Derek necklace, the Greek letters, and kicks the gun out of his hands. They tussle and he gets the gun back. During their conversation, Derek's body like goes back up into the rafters, so it's kind of assumed that there is another ghost face working with Mickey. Mickey calls out his partner and Gail comes out. We assume it's Gail until we see Debbie Salt holding a gun to Gail Weathers. So we are on the theater stage. We have Derek dead, tied to a star up in the rafters. We have Mickey, who has been revealed to be Ghostface, and his partner is Debbie Salt. Debbie Salt has a gun to Gail, who is like standing on the edge of the stage. Sydney recognizes Debbie Salt as Billy Loomis's mom, Mrs. Loomis, and it's revealed that Mrs. Loomis is doing all of this to get revenge on Sydney for killing Billy. She notices that Mickey is going off the rail, so she shoots Mickey. His gun goes off and shoots Gail. Gail falls into the orchestra pit, and then it is just Sydney and Debbie Salt. While Sydney and Debbie Salt are wrestling on the stage, Cotton Weary shows up after shooting a warning shot out. Debbie Salt tries to convince Cotton Weary to let her kill Sydney because Sydney put him in prison and basically ruined his life. So he should just let Debbie, Mrs. Loomis, kill Sydney as revenge. Cotton Weary tells Sydney, I will save you right now if you agree to do the Diane Sawyer interview with me. And Sydney agrees. Cotton shoots Miss Loomis, and they help Gail out of the orchestra pit. There is some like killers getting back up, getting shot like 50,000 times. Mickey gets back up and gets shot 50,000 times. And then the movie ends with Dewey being brought out of the main school on a stretcher. Gail gets into the ambulance with him, and we pan out to Sydney walking across the school's campus. And that is it for Scream 2. Not my favorite. The killer being Billy's mom makes sense, but Mickey, like, I just didn't feel like they really flesh it out all that much. They do sort of set it up a little bit. Billy's mom makes a lot more sense. Okay, so let's go on to Scream 3, released in 2000, the last movie that we will be talking about for this video. So our main cast of characters is Sydney, Gail, Cotton Weary, Dewey, Neil Prescott, who is Sydney's dad, Jennifer, these three actors who are all playing in a Stab movie, the director of Stab 3, Roman Bridgers, and Detective Kincaid, who is working for the Los Angeles Police Department, and then of course we have our ever lovely Ghostface. It's set in Hollywood, and Roman Bridgers is directing a movie for Stab 3, and the actors are her, Jennifer, and these three people. I think that's supposed to be Dewey, that is Sydney, that's Gail, and I don't remember who that is. The assumption would be Dewey, but then I don't remember who he is. So Roman's putting on the movie for Stab 3 that these people are acting in, okay? We open the movie with Cotton Weary in his car, on his car phone, and he gets a call from a mysterious number. It's a woman. They start flirting. Ghostface, the voice changer turns off and it's revealed to be Ghostface, and Ghostface says that he is in Cotton Weary's house with Cotton Weary's girlfriend, and then if Cotton Weary doesn't reveal the location of Sydney, then he's gonna kill Cotton Weary's girlfriend. Cotton Weary starts to race home, and we flash to Cotton Weary's apartment where his girlfriend is getting out of the shower. She hears some noise, and Ghostface ends up chasing her through the apartment using a voice changer to sound like Cotton Weary. Cotton gets home. Ghostface is seemingly gone, but his girlfriend thinks that it's him that's trying to kill her, so she like swings a golf club at him, and then Ghostface comes up behind her, stabs her, and then stabs Cotton Weary. We then cut to the, of course, opening scene of Sydney at her house out in the middle of nowhere with her dogs and intense alarm system, and we see her sit down at a computer with a telephone attached for her job at the Crisis Hot Center. crisis counseling center. Gail Weathers is talking to an audience of reporters, and she gets some questions about her like investigation style and her journalist style, and she gets some critiques. And when she leaves the seminar, she gets approached by Detective Kincaid, McDreamy himself. He reveals that Cotton has been killed, and a photo was left on Cotton's body, and Gail tells him that it was Sydney's mom when she was like a kid, like a teenager, like a young adult. We then cut to Sydney seeing the death on the news, and then we go to the set of Stab 3 where our actors are behind the scenes, and they're talking about the effects of the movie on Cotton's death and what it means for them. The Dewey actor, which is one of them, I think that's Dewey, accuses the real life Sydney of killing Cotton. Basically, she's like gone crazy or whatever and killed Cotton. Gail walks on the set with her camcorder in her bag, and she runs into real life Dewey dating her Gail actress Jennifer. Sydney and her dad are discussing her living alone in the middle of nowhere, and she says psychos can't kill what they can't find. And later that night, she has a dream about her mother in a nightgown walking on her property in the dark. When she wakes up, her mother is outside an open window saying, "You're poisoned just like me." And then Ghostface pops up and she falls. When she looks back, Ghostface is gone. Stab actress Sarah, who is not presented here, ends up getting a call from who she claims to be Roman Bridgers. She says a Roman called her and said to meet in the office, and when she gets there, her Stab fellow actors are there, and she tells them, "Oh, I was supposed to meet Roman here." She gets a phone call from Roman, and he's like, "I'm late, but we can start running a script." So they start running the script together. Voice changer cuts off, and it's Ghostface. He makes some creepy remarks. They banter back and forth. She finds out that she's possibly in danger, and Ghostface chases her through the studio. She ends up hiding in a room. A security guard comes in, hears a weird noise, but doesn't actually investigate, and then she ends up getting killed by Ghostface. And she ends up getting killed by Ghostface like Tate style. It's like a callback to Tate, by pushing her. I think he pushes her through a window and she's like half hanging out of the window. And then Gail and Dewey meet for lunch, and they argue about their breakup, and then Dewey reveals that the police station back in Woodsboro was broken into, and they were looking for Sydney's file, but he had already taken Sydney's file, so he thinks that it's someone on Stab 3 cast, and he's in Hollywood to investigate who in the Stab 3 cast would want her file. Dewey gets a call from fake Gail, Jennifer, saying that he needed to get there quick. Him and Gail rush over to Jennifer's house, and they find out that someone has been killed. Connect the dots that the actors are dying in order of the Stab 3 movies deaths, which means that Gail, Jennifer, is next. The cops find another picture of Sydney's mother on the body, and Dr. Kincaid remarks that usually in movies like this, one cop dies and one cop lives. And then Gail and Dewey show up to talk to Kincaid, and he mentions that there are actually 3 different scripts to Stab 3, and they don't know what script the killer is reading off of, so they don't know who the killer is going to kill next. This is a call, and a previous comment was made by Sarah to the same effect. This is a remark on the fact that the Scream 3 script was rewritten multiple times. It went through different directors. Originally, the killer in the movie was supposed to be Stu Macher. It doesn't end up being Stu Macher, which I think would have been a fantastic ending, but it's been rewritten a bunch of times, basically, and that's like, there's like a whole story behind that. That's part of the reason why I think that this movie is just kind of bad, and it just doesn't feel like the other movies, but that's neither here nor there. Back at the set, Dewey is talking to Roman with the other actors present about Sarah's death, and Roman gets arrested because he was the last person to talk to Sarah, but he says that he never talked to her. Sydney is working her crisis job when she gets a call from someone claiming to be her mom, saying that they've killed someone, and they tell her to turn on the news. When she does, she finds out about the second death, and that Stab 3 has now been canceled. Back at Jennifer's house, Jennifer's bodyguard hears a weird noise and leaves the 3 actors, Jennifer and Dewey, in the house. 2 of the actors, this one and this one, go off. Dewey and Jennifer go off, leaving this one drinking and ripping up the script in the living room. Jennifer's bodyguard finds Gail snooping around the house, and when he pulls Gail into the house, she tells Dewey that Romans called a Sarah was from a clone phone, so it's hard to find out who actually made the call. She says she dug into Maureen, which is which is Sydney's mother. She dug into her past, but they can't really find anything about her from around the time that the picture was taken. But Dewey recognizes the background in one of the pictures as the studio that Stab 3 was being filmed at. Jennifer's bodyguard then gets a call from Ghostface while snooping through Dewey's trailer, and he gets killed by Ghostface with a fire extinguisher. Gail, Dewey, and all the actors see the bodyguard like stumbling through the yard with a knife in his back. Dewey and they all run into the house. Dewey locks them in, and then the power goes out. They all run outside, the fax machine starts going, and the fax machine spits out a page of the final script saying how the killer, like how all of them will die, and it says, and the killer will grant mercy to whoever smells the gas. This is being read by this actor, and then the house blows up, and Gail, Dewey, Jennifer, and this actress run out of the house, and they end up getting split up, and they're like rolling down hills and stuff. After they meet back at Gail's van, Dewey shoots Ghostface for trying to stab Gail. Jennifer pops up, and she sees them about to kiss, so she slaps Dewey. Gail slaps her, and then this actress shows up at a weird place, like on the property that she shouldn't have been with like how they fell. And then Dewey sees, sorry, Roman. And then Dewey sees a note left under her tire saying, "I killed her," and it's a picture of Maureen. Kincaid, back at the police station with Dewey and Gail, says that the killer is now trying to take credit for killing Maureen. He proposes that there's a third killer and he wants to talk to Sydney. Sydney shows up at the police station and sees the photos of her mom and requests a visit to the studio that's in the background. When they get there, Randy, who passed in the previous movie's sister, is there, and she has a videotape of Randy, and he breaks down the 3 rules of the concluding chapter of a trilogy. The killer will be superhuman, anyone can die, even the main character, and the past will come to bite you in the ass. Gail goes back to the studio while Dewey and Sydney are looking at the studio, trying to like find out what's going on with their mom. Gail tries to access the studio archives, but she can't get in because it's locked, so Jennifer helps her. They go down to the basement of the studio archives, and they see Princess Leia, and she gives them Sydney's mother's actress folder, and they find out that the only movies that she acted in were all directed by this one director. We then cut to Sydney in the bathroom, who has run into her actress, and the actress has the Ghostface costume, and she just claims that she wanted it to be a souvenir and that she only ever wanted to make Sydney proud in the movies. When she follows her to return a dropped hairbrush, she stumbles across the Stab 3 set that's like set up like Woodsboro, and she enters her old bedroom and hears a voice, starts hearing voices from the past. While reminiscing, she hears a noise on set, and when her door to her bedroom opens on its own, Ghostface attacks her through the window like Billy did in the first one. Ghostface chases her around the set, and once Ghostface leaves, she hears her mother's voice calling to her, and she stumbles across the staged crime scene of her mother's murder, and then she climbs out the window of that room because she thinks that Ghostface is behind her. Gail, Dewey, and Jennifer confront the director of Stab 3, John Milton, who says he only directed the Stab movies because they came to him first, and when he accepted the directorship or whatever, he didn't know that it was about Sydney's mother's death, and he didn't know that there was a connection between that actress in those movies that he directed all those years ago and Sydney's mother. But when he found out, he didn't tell anyone. They question him more and he reveals that Sydney's mother was invited to a party and nothing happened to her that she didn't want. No charges were pressed, and she eventually left Hollywood because she couldn't hang. Dewey gets a call from Sydney claiming that she is going to a Hollywood party with Kincaid at Milton's house. So Dewey and Gail show up at Milton's house where Roman and the actors are. Sydney is not there, so Gail and Dewey decide to wait. They all go off to explore Milton's house. Roman and Jennifer go down to the basement. They go explore like the rest of the house. And then when Sydney doesn't show up, they start investigating and they try to give her a call. She claims that she never called them, and they find a phone with a voice changer in one of the closets. So they think that it might be Milton. They need to find everyone and like get out. And they find Roman in the basement in a coffin, stabbed. She finds Jennifer and they run out to find Dewey, run into the Sydney actress who runs away from them and ends up getting stabbed by Ghostface. Dewey, Jennifer, and Gail meet up. Ghostface punches Dewey and then chases and throws the third actor out the window. I don't remember which one it is. Ghostface then finds Jennifer and stabs her against a one-way mirror while Dewey is trying to shoot it to get to her. While Dewey is looking for the last actor, which I think is Tyson, Ghostface grabs Gail and they tumble down the basement stairs. Ghostface gets knocked out, trapping Gail in the basement. And when Dewey opens the basement door to try to save Gail, Ghostface throws the knife up the stairs and hits him in the forehead with the butt of the knife, knocking him out. Back at the station, Sydney discovers a file Kincaid had on her, including photos and like highlighted news articles. And then she gets a call from someone using a voice changer, and she hears Gail and Dewey in the background. She agrees to meet Ghostface after he baits her with the knowledge of who killed her mother. She steals the keys to Kincaid's car and gun. Sydney shows up at Milton's house, and Ghostface makes her throw the gun in the pool. When she enters the house, Dewey and Gail are tied to chairs, and Ghostface shows up behind her. She shoots him 3 times with another gun that was hidden in her boot. Kincaid comes around a corner with a gun alone, and when Sydney calls him out for being alone, he puts his gun away and asks her to do the same. As she's lowering her gun, Ghostface attacks from behind, and Kincaid saves her. They tussle, and Kincaid gets knocked out. Sydney runs out of bullets and runs away. Ghostface chases her. She finds a hidden pathway in Milton's office and hides. And then she starts hearing her mother's voice and follows it down a path leading to a room with a projector playing a home movie of her mom putting makeup on. There's a figure in a bloody sheet talking in her mom's voice and reveals himself to be Ghostface. Ghostface says it's time to come to terms with me and mommy and reveals a bulletproof vest. Ghostface reveals he's Sydney's brother and pulls off his mask to reveal Roman. He tried to get Maureen to accept him, but she refused, so he started stalking her and filming her, and he caught her having many affairs and sent tapes to Billy. Dewey and Gail break their bindings, take Kincaid's gun, and go to find Sydney. Roman brings Milton out of the closet, taped and tied, and tells the truth of what he did to Maureen, and plans to frame Sydney for Milton's murder. Sydney eggs him on into attacking her, and they tussle, and then before Roman can choke her to death, Dewey shorts out the power. Kincaid tries to save Sydney but gets knocked out by Roman. Roman grabs Kincaid's gun and shoots Sydney twice. When Roman turns back around to lock the door, he finds that Sydney is gone, and Sydney calls Roman's cell phone. She finds him by his phone ringing. She jumps over the bar and stabs him. She pulls up her shirt to reveal that she's also wearing a bulletproof jacket, and then she stabs Roman again and holds his hand while he dies. He stands back up, and Dewey shoots him like 15 times in the chest until Sydney tells him to shoot for the head. The final scene is Gail and Dewey at Sydney's house. Dewey asks Gail to sign one of her books, and when she opens the book, it's an engagement ring. She says yes, and then Gail kisses him, puts on the ring, and we cut to Sydney leaving the gates of her property open, and she's like walking up to the house. Then she leaves the front door open, and then she goes and watches a movie with Gail, Dewey, and Kincaid. And that is the end of Scream 3 and the end of my recap. Overall, for Scream 3, it doesn't really feel like the other Scream movies. It doesn't really have that like campy feel to it. It feels very like, I don't know, it just kind of feels like a B flick, like a, it's just not good, in my opinion. And I think the majority of Scream fans sort of agree with that opinion. I don't think most people like Scream 3, but you know, it is what it is. That is the conclusion to the Sydney trilogy. Like I said, I will be doing a recap of 4 on its own, and then I will also be doing a recap of 5 through 7 whenever 7 comes out. So if you really like this, let me know. If you just had it on for background noise, let me know that too. If you also are interested in hearing more about my Scream opinions, I do have a podcast that is Scream themed. We talk about various other horror movies as well, but we do have several Scream themed episodes, including one where we rank our opinions on the Scream movies in general. So if that is something you're interested in, you can find it down below. Other than that, make sure you comment your thoughts on this video style. Shout out to all of the other creators on the platform who have made videos like this previously and sort of set a template or a cornerstone for us copycats to do and use going forward. But yeah, I hope to see you guys in my next video. Make sure you follow all my social medias, linked down below. Subscribe if you're looking for more content like this, or if you just like cozy vlogs, because I do those too. But I will catch you guys in my next one. Thanks so much for watching.